it's great to have you back for our next session. This one's a panel discussion on why the future of liquidity management requires a re-architecture of third-party connectivity. With the birth of Cloud for Enterprise came Workday and Oracle Fusion and SAP S/4HANA, along with more niche software players like Salesforce and Stripe. As companies position themselves to take full advantage of all the benefits of cloud ERP services, the impact of bank connectivity is often underestimated or even worse, overlooked. An ERP migration project can be a prime opportunity for Treasury, Finance, and IT to transform the ways they communicate with their banking partners. In this session, our panel discussion will cover both the need to reimagine connectivity, as well as the experiences that each of our panelists have had in launching bank connectivity simplification programs. Stephen Otwell, Kyriba's Director of Payments, will be leading this session with industry experts from both McCormick as well as Accenture. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Yasmin. Appreciate the introduction there. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here at the next 30 minutes on the Kyriba Global Summit. We're talking today about the future of liquidity management, how it requires a re-architecture of third-party connectivity. This has been a really interesting time for Kyriba here, a big push from our application, or how enterprises are utilizing this, right? What we're seeing in the marketplace today is a digitization of traditional on-premise architecture. We're seeing Oracle move their EBS platform, their PeopleSoft, JDE, over to the Oracle Cloud, and we're seeing the same thing from SAP moving customers to S/4HANA. This re-architecture, the customers moving to the cloud, is really enabling customers to rethink of how they manage some of the connectivity platforms. And Kyriba is playing a big part in that. We're helping these digitizations by being provide a quick and efficient way to reduce some of these costs and complexities around how they manage these integrations to the banks. So I wanted to thank our guest today. First, Cameron Armbruster. He is the North American Oracle ERP Cloud Delivery Lead from Accenture. I want to thank him for joining. And we've got one of our existing clients on board as well, Amit Garg from McCormick. Amit is a IT business relationship consultant with McCormick, who has been part of a migration at McCormick, moving to S/4HANA and utilizing Kyriba as that connectivity platform. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Steve.
So let's get into this, right? Cameron, I think you see a lot of this in your practice today, working with customers, the complexity of getting Oracle Cloud connected to the bank. You know, we conducted a pulse survey here at Kyriba. We surveyed 200 CIOs and VPs of IT and found that 93% of these, I was even surprised by this number, said that the bank connectivity component of their ERP project was one of the most complicated aspects of that project. Is this what you're seeing in the market, in the field, when you're working with your customers?
Yeah, definitely, Stephen. It often is kind of one of the longest poles in the tent when we do these either Oracle ERP cloud implementations, or even back in the day when we did the on-premise implementations. So, and there's a number of reasons why it's an issue and why it's a challenge. I'd say the first one is there really is no standardization across the banks in the format. So even when a bank is using the same type of format, they all have some nuances to their own specific way that they do it. So one bank versus the other may have some slight variations. So even if you say, hey, I'm going to use this consistent format, each bank means a different setup and a different file that you need to send to them. So that adds some complexity there.
On that point, Cameron, I think it's very interesting, right? Because we talk to customers, and a lot of them think that Swift is a silver bullet, that they can get their banks connected to Swift, and okay, they're all on Swift, and it's easy, it's standardization. And in the day, Swift is a pipeline for the banks to send files back and forth. But you're right, the complexity is not lying in the file structure, it's the formats required by each bank specifically. And they'll take a standard XML file, but the way those fields have to be allocated inside has to match up with their own internal system. So it still provides a whole lot of complexity, and I'm not surprised.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it's Don, even within one bank, you may have some differences and nuances from country to country. So when you're thinking about a global implementation, and we do a lot of global implementations at Accenture, you may have, Bank XYZ has a format in the US, has a different format in Germany, has a different format in Japan.
Yeah.
So even when you have a single banking relationship, sometimes you're still dealing with the complexity of multiple formats. And then with Swift as well, you talked a little bit about that. I mean, one of the other things that's kind of been added is some of the new compliance standards that Swift has. So that requires a lot more internal domain experience and expertise in Swift. So it's definitely not the silver bullet, right? As you mentioned.
Yeah, and you mentioned the bank formats. Even look at like Citibank. Citibank is 1,000 different banks they've bought up over the years, and branch to branch that they have different work format requirements. So if you send one to one city in a country and another city in another country, it may be a different format required. So I completely agree. It's on that complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that people miss a lot when they are planning these projects, right? They over simplify some of the assumptions around the banking and the number of different formats and the complexities there. And so that's one of the things that people miss often in these implementations. So it's definitely something people need to really focus on up front, is really understanding the complexity of the ecosystem they have there.
Right. And then fraud.
Yeah, and fraud's another really interesting one. So I think it's always been a concern. I would say in the times of COVID, it has increased exponentially, and as a level of concern from everybody. All of our clients are concerned about payment fraud. There's a stat that I read that between February and April of this year alone, payment fraud increased 1,000%. Right, so in 3 months, 1,000% increase in payment fraud. So it's really become a key concern. So not only do you have the complexity of all these different standards, you have real concern around payment fraud and how do you prevent it, right?
Yeah. We're certainly seeing that with our customers. Obviously, what's happened, in 2019, up to 2019, we go to customer's office, we'd have a presentation, we'd talk to them, and inevitably they would show, someone from AP takes a file folder to somebody else's desk and they lay it down and they use key fobs to log in, and folders and paper gets pushed around on how payments are released. And then within a matter of weeks, everyone was working from home. All that workflow was completely disrupted, and the fraudsters are seeing this. They're capitalizing on it. And agree, it's not only a concern. We've seen this push what was traditionally maybe a treasury finance concern, somewhat IT, has now gone past the CFO, and we have instances where customers coming to us because it's now board mandated. So this has now reached CEO and board of directors level because there's such concern around it. So it's obviously a hot topic, and I know Accenture is looking to help.
Definitely top of a lot of people's mind. I think the last point around connectivity is the lack of flexibility. So let's say you get past this, you do the implementation, and you're live on the new SAP S/4HANA, the new Oracle ERP cloud solution. A lot of times, your treasury group wants to have the flexibility to continue to change their banking relationships to get the best relationships, the best fees possible, right?
Yep.
You tend to be a little bit more locked in once you do these implementations. The lead time and the length of time it takes to change from one bank to the other with these bank connectivity issues causes you to kind of get a little bit locked in, and you lose some of that flexibility. And I know it's something that's really important to treasury, especially in this day and age, to be able to kind of manage those relationships and optimize them in the best way possible.
Yeah, IT being the bottleneck, we see it all the time. And we're getting to hear from Amit about this as well, because unfortunately he was part of that bottleneck, because it's difficult, right? And customers are continuously talking to us and saying, look, if I'm in treasury, I'm in finance, my part inside the organization is managing our bank relationships. And I need, if we're going into a new country, a new division, we're opening a new plant somewhere, I need flexibility to add new banks. And inevitably, we'll talk to customers and say, well, when I call IT, it's 6 months out. It's 8 months out until I get a new bank integrated. They're looking for flexibility around a platform where they can take control of their business and manage the integration of those banks at a quicker, more agile speed. And then I see the last bullet point down here, Cameron, Swift domain expertise, right? The one thing that we've seen a lot in this, it's started happening in actually December of this year. Swift has a new domain requirements, right? Typically customers, as you would probably see, right, on the ERP side, would implement AL2, the Light 2 application for Swift. Now they've got to have all these annual certifications, tests. They have to have multiple domain expertise that are certified on this to run it. So you need one or two, you need backup. It's costly, it's expensive to help manage that. And customers are trying to look for ways to reduce that cost and get rid of those internal requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Just another skill set that groups now need to add to their organizations that are already probably overburdened with knowing a bunch of different technologies and different connectivity options there.
Absolutely. So let's move to this some real world examples, right? So Amit, McCormick's been a long time customer of Kyriba, traditionally implemented us for our usual treasury management solution. As 2,500 customers around the globe have done it. But when it came time for McCormick to move to S/4HANA, we had a lot of conversations with you guys, and you saw the value of instead of looking at individual integrations from S/4HANA to the banks, implementing Kyriba. Lack of a better word, customers look at us as a middleware component, right? We sit between the ERP and the banks, and we normalize the flow of the data. So prior to that, Amit, let's talk about some of the complexities on two sides, right? Payments going from SAP to the banks, and then the complexities of file structures coming back from the banks into SAP. So pre-Kyriba, what did you guys, and what were some complexities you saw in managing payments?
Yeah, definitely. I will walk through it. So we have like a global setup in McCormick, and pre-Kyriba, we do have this complexities in setting up the host-to-host bank connections.
Mm-hmm.
And as Cameron stated, that each bank and each branch has its own format, and the data which we share with the bank is totally sensitive in nature. So we have to design the format exactly as per the bank requirement. So that's the first complexity. And we need like 3 resources at least from the IT team to get engaged. And they need like, besides the requirement gathering and all, they need at least, I would say 5 to 8 man days for each of those. So that total comes around like somewhere 25 man days of the IT efforts in setting up the connection. So that's a huge thing. And after that,
is that just the connection? So I say I'm going to work with Citibank. I've now got to establish my, I guess, either an FTP or a Swift connection. So it's just getting first that pipeline built, right? The connection point, the plumbing for it.
Yeah, it's the pipeline and the file format as well. So
okay.
Like we can build that in parallel, but we need different resources. So that's how we do it. But definitely it takes a lot of time. And sometimes we end up in like redesigning the format again and again, because banks normally revise their formats and they have to follow this protocol because the holding company or the main headquarters have revised it, or it is revised due to the country regulations and like that. Right. So sometimes it falls in between and we have to redesign the entire format. So it was challenging.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in your take on this, and maybe what you see as well, Cameron. You're working with customers on this. Is we hear it's multiple teams, right? You've got IT resources that have to get involved. You probably have to have someone from the business, right? You've got either who owns the banking, treasury, or finance may be involved. You may have a digitization team that's involved in this. And then you've also got the bank also has to assign a tech team for each of these formats have to be developed. So it's the coordinate. What we hear is that the complexity around this is working on the bank's time, right? It's the coordination of 3, 4, sometimes 5 different teams, getting this, and you have to go through a testing scenario. It fails, you have to go back again, and it's redundant, and it's time consuming, and you have to keep doing it over and over again. Is that pretty common?
Yeah, that's the I would say the most hidden complexity of this entire cycle. So what happens is we can always do the setup in a defined time frame, but when it comes to testing, so we cannot really like define a time frame for the entire scenarios or the test cases. Or sometimes we do have like vendors across different locations. So there are different information which are required in the bank in the same format, but for a particular country. So that we come to know only after we start testing. And this testing cycle, believe me, it was taking huge time. So ranging from somewhere to like 3 to 4 months, we end up finishing the entire cycle in 5 to 6 months for a single connection testing. And the entire bank team and the entire the IT team and the persons from the treasury team were engaged during this test cycle.
Okay.
So that was a huge test cycle which we used to observe.
Yeah, and I think Amit, what you probably find, right, is at least I found on most of my projects is the first time you send a file into the bank, it's always going to fail, right? Because the bank tends to give you some general requirements about what they need, but they're not very specific. And so it's not that your team, the teams have just not followed instructions correctly. It's that the bank wasn't very clear, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we forgot to tell you, you need to do this as well." And so you're going through that cycle at least once, often multiple times, and it kind of resets the clock. Every time you do that, you now have the new timeline to work with the bank, and they say the lead time to get a new file to them, get their response, right? That's kind of what you're seeing, right, Amit?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I can add a very recent experience which we had. So we shared a file with the bank, and it could not reach the bank just because they have changed the PGP keys, and we were not aware of it. And when we identified the root cause, we have to again deploy the key, and it was like we lost around 1 week or so in that investigation. So that's a simple change which bank did, and we were not informed. So that's the kind of things which are normally faced during testing.
Yeah. The other reason we see about this, Cameron, is that we've heard that it's hard to scope, right? Is you working with customers on, okay, I need to integrate 10 banks for payments. And a lot of times you don't know what the scope is until you can, how do you do it? I mean, is it kind of open-ended until you actually get in and start testing with the banks? How do you try to confine this and give the customer a tighter scope around it?
Yeah, I mean, so we try to ask as many questions up front as possible around, understanding a little bit of, okay, it's not just, how many banks do you have relationships with, but it's the bank in country intersection points, and then it's the bank country in file formats or file types that you're sending, or types of payments, right? If you're just sending ACHs, sometimes you're sending check prints, things like that. So we do try to ask as many of those questions up front to scope it. But it's always still a little bit of a complexity, and it always requires us to make sure that we have the right time buffered in here, because we do know, I mean, it is, the 5 to 6 months per bank for the testing is correct. And like I said, it always tends to be the long pole in the tent in the accounts payable space, at least. Right?
Okay.
But it's not a perfect science at this point, because there are a lot of hidden things that you hit, like Amit mentioned, once you get into some of the testing there.
It's difficult. So why don't, Cameron, why don't we move to some of the value proposition right here? When McCormick and other customers implement this, we talked about the complexities. It's time consuming. It's hard to know what the banks want. What's some of the value some of the unique gains you saw on your side, Amit, for McCormick?
We had some I would say amazing benefits which we realized when we actually had the first pilot. And this was like we have to design only a single payment file with Kyriba. So Kyriba is I would say is offering a single file to be designed, and that's a very user-friendly file which we have designed. And after that, it's the entire Kyriba job to share it with the bank in the respective format. So we are off from the setting up the connection and any further. And the resources are amazingly they are relieved of like what they were doing earlier. Now they are assigned to some other projects and some other assignments besides this host-to-host connection setting up.
Okay.
And somewhere we realized that we have actually saved somewhere around like 70 to 80% of the setup time, and also the maintenance time has decreased I would say prominently, and it's around 90%. So we are just dealing with any change in the bank account numbers or the addresses of the vendors. So that's all the change which we are dealing with right now. And any change in the bank file format is being handled by Kyriba. So our job is like one-time setup with Kyriba, and then we are happy to operate for all the units we have across the globe.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a strong value proposition, right? So Kyriba, this is not a solution we could start off and build in a year. It's taken us 20 years to get to a point that we've got 2,500 customers thousands of banks that we built and tested these formats for. And we took a different approach, right? We built a payment format library. We have productized our solution around payments and formats. It's a shared solution across all our customers. So the formats that McCormick uses to send payments across the globe and that are tested on behalf of Kyriba for you is the exact same format that 1,000 other customers use here at Kyriba. So it's a different way to model that, a different way to look at it. It brings, what we think is a faster time to value for SAP or Oracle Cloud, Cameron, right? Your IT resources are not worried about the minutia of working with the banks, getting all that file structure done. It's almost kind of more out of the box connectivity, which helps manage these payment format flows across the enterprise.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing is it frees up time, not just for the IT folks, but we talked a little bit earlier about, when you do these bank setups, it's truly a cross-disciplinary team that needs to be involved. So you have folks from finance, you have folks from treasury that are involved. So freeing up the time, not only for the one-time effort, but also the maintenance of it. And especially in this day and age where treasury needs to be so focused on liquidity analysis, other things like that, they're able to move from, focus on transaction processing to the real value add around analytics and really analyzing liquidity, cash flow, things like that. So I think it's a really great benefit, not just for the one time, but also the ongoing maintenance, the reduction there.
Exactly, right. And I think it's a great point, Karen. If Barclays makes a change on how they have to send a format structure to a bank in Ireland, traditionally all of Barclays, every customer using Barclays would have to go into their ERP, make that format change and retest it with the bank. With Kyriba, since it's a shared architecture, we make that change once, and our 2,500 customers had no idea that was even a requirement by the bank. It's taken off their table. We take full ownership around that. Okay, so I think that's interesting, guys. So that was, again, this is a two-way street, right? We always look at this as the middleware component between the ERP and the banks. On one end, we've got over 1,000 banks connected to the Kyriba platform. On the other end, customers would connect the ERP. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 ERPs, as you probably see with a lot of customers, Cameron. It's everyone ideally wants to get down to that single global platform. Some of the size of customers we work with, they've probably got a little smattering of PeopleSoft somewhere and maybe an SAP around there and trying to manage all that under one connection point, one workflow.
Yep.
So, okay, that was payments. Now let's talk about the reverse of that, of what you guys saw, Amit, on bank statements. So the flow and the connectivity of sending information from the banks back into S/4HANA.
Yeah, so just like the payment side, we do have the requirement of mapping the bank statements whenever we receive them. And obviously we were faced with certain complexities when we are setting up them directly without the Kyriba tool. Mm-hmm. So just like the payment files, bank statements also have their unique formats. It can be multi-cache or it can be MT940 or BI2, whatever it is. And it has to be mapped 1:1 basis in SAP. And again, since it is 1-to-1 mapping, so we do have a lot of posting rules, which defines the posting of statements and each and every transaction.
Right.
So at the end, we end up in having a lot of posting rules, which are like hard to trace out whenever there is a change in the bank statement and we have to modify it. So it takes a lot of time to create as well as maintain those posting rules. And sometimes it's like a jumbled up set of posting rules somewhere, like if we have Citibank or some other bank spanning across multiple entities across the globe. So there is a chance of getting mixed up in those posting rules.
So if you, just so I understand this, right? If you're saying 2 to 4 weeks per bank account. So if you may be working with Citibank, you're adding another net new account, that's another 2 to 4 weeks of IT resources, that single account mapped back into SAP. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think McCormick had somewhere around 300 plus bank accounts globally. And was that prior to this, was that 300 unique connection points from those accounts back into SAP?
Yeah, almost, I would say not all of them, because for some of the banks, we do not have the direct connections as of now, as we do not have the bandwidth to like switch automatic connection for all the banks.
Right.
So right now, I think it's limited to 60 to 70% of the bank accounts. But yes, we were in the process of getting them on the direct connection, and on an average, it took us around like 2 to 4 weeks for setting up a bank statement and getting it tested. And it's not only the IT, but it was like majorly business teams who were testing it, because we cannot expect all the business transactions to come up in a single bank statement. So
Yeah.
it was like testing more than a month to ensure that the entire cycle has been covered, especially the payment at the end of the quarters or at the end of the year. So that was like a lengthy exercise for testing for the business teams.
Okay.
And we do have a team member like from the treasury, and we do have a team member from the financial postings, so who are validating the stuff. So it's like reaching out to them again and again, and asking the validations, and like this was like 1 month at least, and sometimes it can go up to 2 months of testing.
Wow, very time consuming. And Cameron, I assume SAP is not unique in this, right? You see the same thing on the Oracle side?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Same challenges on the Oracle side, same complexities, because really the complexities are rising from the way that the banks deal with all the different the statement formats. So.
Okay. So let's see where some of the gains come from Kyriba. Again, much like payments, right, Amit, where you would have a single file structure coming out of S/4HANA into Kyriba for all payment types. It's essentially the same in reverse, right? A direct file structure coming from Kyriba back into SAP for all the accounts. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like almost the same benefits, but for the bank statement side now.
Yep.
So again, we have mapped only a single file from Kyriba into SAP, which is posting all the transactions for all the banks. So that's a very easy, I would say, setup, and it's a one-time setup again. So we do not have to map it again and again. And if there's any additional transaction or anything additional which bank provides us in the statement, so it needs to be mapped into the Kyriba tool, which is capable of mapping it to the respective posting GL account, and
Right.
we do not have to make any change on the SAP side. So it's like no IT efforts is required whenever there is a change, or whenever there is I would say, a new bank file coming into SAP from a new bank account. So it's just like we need only 10% of the IT effort for setting up a new bank account. It's not for the file format. It's just the like defining the new bank account code and all those stuff. So
Okay.
we have drastically reduced the IT efforts by using this feature of Kyriba.
So essentially, you've removed all the banking management, ongoing banking management inside SAP, and put it inside the Kyriba hub, and it's all managed there instead of the nuances of individual instances inside SAP.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like we are just using this as a I would say a router who holds the like the master data from ERP or SAP, and maps it to the statements, and we receive the information what we want.
Okay.
And we do not have any kind of like the posting rules or any other posting key. There are some other setup which we have for the direct connections, but for Kyriba, those additional setup have gone now. So it's really simple now.
Great. So let's, I want to wrap up. And when customers look at this application and we're looking at what value does it provide, we look at this a couple of different components, right? There's certainly an ROI behind this. As Amit said, and Cameron, you may see this as well. We typically can show somewhere, especially on an ERP project, hours are money, essentially. We usually show about an 80+%, sometimes 90% is what we showed with Amit, time savings of how we can bring the solution to into production faster. So we look at cost reduction and predictability, right? It reduces the cost. We can accurately predict the time it's going to take to implement because we've already got the stuff formatted. We talked about speed and flexibility, right? Treasurers, finance folks are looking to be able to adapt to net new banks quickly and efficiently. We talked about the complexities with fraud. This is now at a board level director in some components. Our solution does provide bank grade security. We actually have many customers implementing this. It runs under a SOC 1, SOC 2 certifications. So the same certifications that any banking workstation would provide under. Our contractual business continuity, we have RPO, RTO, and 99.9% uptime. And I think the biggest differentiator between this is, right, when you would look at a traditional ERP integration, what you're buying with that is code base, right? You're providing someone to code out and integrate from the bank into the ERP system. What we're providing here is really, there's code involved, but it's a service-based application, right? It is the ongoing management of the nuances and the changes in the banks, and we service that and make sure that the platform stays up to date with the banks as the bank standards change. Well, it looks like that wraps it up. Due to our limited time, we won't be able to take any questions and answers, but anyone out there that does have questions they want to submit, please submit to activeliquidity@Kyriba.com. I want to thank again Amit and Cameron for participating today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and at this point, I'm